A billionaire father thought he had everything money could buy until he watched a stranger crawl on the floor with his son. And suddenly, his world began to unravel. Mr. Donovan was the kind of man people whispered about when he entered a room. He had the kind of wealth that could build skyscrapers, buy private islands, and change entire cities with a single investment. He lived in a world of power and privilege, a world where problems were solved with signatures and bank transfers. But for all the money he had, there was something missing in his life. Something that even he, with all his resources, couldn't buy. Closeness with his own son. Ethan was 8 years old. A small boy with brown hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. He was quiet, polite, and often looked like he was lost in his own world. At school, teachers described him as shy. At home, he was even quieter. He had toys, gadgets, and every comfort a child could ask for. But what he didn't have was the warmth of a father who truly knew him. Donovan loved his son in his own way, but he didn't know how to show it. His life was built on schedules, meetings, and numbers. He spent more time looking at contracts than looking into Ethan's eyes. When Ethan tried to tell him about something at school, Donovan's attention would wander to his phone, 2 emails that couldn't wait. The boy had grown used to his father's distance. He rarely asked for attention anymore, as if he had learned that silence was easier than disappointment. One late evening, after finishing a long meeting with potential investors, Donovan decided to take Ethan out for dinner. It wasn't planned, not really. He simply didn't feel like going home to the big empty mansion where the staff waited and the silence echoed in every hallway. He wanted something different, something quieter, so he chose a small family-style restaurant tucked away in the city. It was nothing fancy by his standards, but it was warm, cozy, filled with the chatter of families when they walked in. Donovan was dressed sharply as always, his suit perfectly pressed. Ethan, holding his father's hand, looked small next to him, almost fragile. The boy's eyes darted around the room, curious but hesitant. He wasn't used to these kinds of places, most of the time. He ate in luxury restaurants where waiters moved like shadows, and no one raised their voice above a polite murmur. Here, the atmosphere was different. Children laughed, clinking plates filled the air, and there was a kind of comfortable mésalliance that felt alive. They were seated at a table near the window. Donovan immediately placed his phone on the table, its screen lighting up every few seconds with messages. Ethan sat quietly across from him, his hands folded in his lap, waiting. He didn't speak, and Donovan didn't notice. He was scrolling through numbers, emails, and updates. That was when she arrived. Claire, the waitress, came to their table with a bright smile that seemed to light up her whole face. She was in her mid-20s, with an energy that felt both gentle and lively. She greeted Donovan politely, but her eyes lingered on Ethan. She bent down slightly so she could be closer to the boy's level and said, "And who do we have here tonight?" Ethan blinked at her, uncertain. He wasn't used to strangers paying him that kind of attention. His eyes dropped to the table, and he mumbled something too quiet for anyone to hear. Donovan barely looked up from his phone. "This is my son," he said curtly, as if that explained everything. But Claire didn't let the conversation end there. She crouched a little lower, so she was eye to eye with Ethan. "Well, it's nice to meet you," she said softly. "I'm Claire, and I'll be your waitress tonight. Do you like spaghetti? Or are you more of a chicken nuggets person?" For the first time, Ethan's lips curled into the tiniest smile, though he quickly tried to hide it. He whispered, "Spaghetti." Claire grinned. "Excellent choice. I think spaghetti makes superheroes stronger. Did you know that?" Ethan shook his head, and a small giggle escaped before he could stop it. Donovan glanced up from his phone, surprised. He hadn't heard that sound in a long time. As Claire walked away to put in their order, Donovan returned to his phone. But Ethan's eyes followed her across the room, watching how she moved from table to table with the same cheerful energy. She laughed with a family in the corner, teased a toddler by pretending to steal a fry, patted an old man on the shoulder as if he were family. Ethan couldn't stop staring. When Claire came back with drinks, she didn't just set them down. She placed a small folded napkin in front of Ethan. On it, she had doodled a quick little cartoon to stick figures. One big and one small, holding swords and fighting a silly-looking dragon. She tapped the drawing with her pen. "That's you," she whispered, pointing to the small figure. "And that's me. We're taking down the dragon together. What do you think?" Ethan's face lit up in a way Donovan wasn't prepared for. The boy picked up the napkin and studied it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He didn't say much, but the sparkle in his eyes said everything. Donovan raised an eyebrow. He found the gesture odd, even unprofessional, but he couldn't deny the effect it had on his son. He tucked his phone into his pocket for the first time that evening, watching silently as they ate. Ethan became more animated. He whispered little comments to Claire whenever she came by, even answering her questions with more than a word. Donovan sat in quiet astonishment, observing. He was used to his son being reserved, hiding behind shyness. But now here he was, giggling softly, leaning forward as if he wanted the moments with Claire to last longer. Halfway through the meal, Ethan accidentally dropped his toy car on the floor. It rolled under the table, out of his reach. Donovan expected Claire to simply bend down, pick it up, and hand it back. But she didn't. Instead, she crouched down dramatically and peered under the table as though she had just discovered a hidden cave. "Oh no," she whispered loudly enough for Ethan to hear. "A runaway car in the dungeon? We need a rescue mission." Before Donovan could react, Claire dropped to her hands and knees and crawled under the table. She made silly sound effects as she reached for the car, her voice full of playful seriousness. Ethan's eyes widened, and then, to Donovan's shock, the boy slid out of his seat and crawled under the table too. Together, they retrieved the car, laughing like explorers on an adventure. The entire scene stunned Donovan. He had never seen his son so alive, so full of joy. Ethan's laugh was bright and free, echoing through the small space like music Donovan didn't realize he had been missing. For a man used to polished silence and stiff smiles at galas, the sight of his son crawling on the floor with a stranger seemed almost absurd, and yet it touched something deep inside him. When Claire emerged, dusting off her knees and handing the car back with a triumphant, "Mission accomplished," Ethan beamed as if she had saved the world. Donovan just sat there, his hands folded on the table, staring. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't move to answer it. For the first time in a very long time, his full attention was on his son. Ethan climbed back into his seat, holding the car tightly and grinning from ear to ear. His father watched him in silence, realizing that in all the years of wealth, gifts and privileges, he had never been able to bring that smile out of his son. And yet, here it was. Freely given because of a waitress who wasn't afraid to crawl on the floor. That night was supposed to be just another dinner, just another moment in a busy man's life. But as Donovan sat across from his son, hearing him laugh, watching his eyes shine, he felt something he couldn't explain. Something was shifting, though he didn't yet know just how much. Claire returned to the table with the same bright smile, balancing plates with ease, as if she had been born to do this job. She set Ethan's spaghetti in front of him, twirling the noodles neatly so they didn't look messy, and gave Donovan his dish as well. "There you go, gentlemen," she said warmly. "One superhero dinner and one executive meal." Her eyes twinkled when she looked at Ethan, who was already giggling at the idea of spaghetti being superhero food. Ethan twirled his fork carefully, his movements delicate and shy, but every now and then he peeked up at Claire as if waiting for her to say something else. Donovan noticed it. His son, who rarely looked up at anyone, was now watching this waitress as if she was the most interesting person in the world. Donovan sat straighter in his chair, curious, but also slightly uncomfortable. He wasn't used to strangers stepping so naturally into his son's world. Claire crouched down again beside the boy. "Do you know what happens if you eat too much spaghetti?" she whispered dramatically. Ethan's eyes widened and he shook his head. She leaned closer, covering the side of her mouth with her hand. "You turn into a spaghetti superhero. You get extra noodle powers. But," she raised her fingers seriously, "you can only use them for good." Ethan burst into another quiet giggle, one hand covering his mouth. He glanced at his father, half afraid he might get in trouble for laughing too loudly, but Donovan said nothing. He was too busy staring, not at Claire this time, but at Ethan. that smile so free, so genuine, was something he had forgotten existed on his son's face. Donovan cleared his throat. "Eat your food, Ethan," he said softly, more out of habit than anything. But Claire just winked at the boy and said, "Don't worry. Superheroes always finish their meals." Throughout the dinner, Claire kept coming back, not just to check on drinks or refill water, but to keep Ethan engaged. She made silly jokes, asked him about school, and even pretended to write down his answers in her notepad as if he were giving the most important orders of the night. "You like drawing?" she asked after he shyly admitted it. "Well, if you draw dragons, I'll draw heroes to fight them." She placed another little doodle on a napkin, this time of a stick figure with a cape, and slid it toward him. Ethan's cheeks flushed with happiness as he traced the lines with his finger. Donovan watched silently. Something about the way Claire spoke to his son was unsettling, not in a bad way, but in a way that forced him to confront something inside himself. He, a man of influence and respect, had never knelt to his son's level. He had never crawled on the floor to make him laugh. He had never even thought about doodling something to make him smile. It wasn't that he didn't care, he told himself. It was just... he didn't know how. When Ethan accidentally spilled a little sauce on the table, Donovan instinctively reached for a napkin, ready to clean it quickly and move on. But Claire stopped him with a gentle smile. "Don't worry. That's how you know it's a real spaghetti adventure," she said playfully. She leaned toward Ethan. "Did you know superheroes always get messy when they eat? It's true. That's why they wear capes to catch the spills." Ethan laughed so hard his small shoulders shook, and Donovan froze, napkin still in his hand. He slowly lowered it back to the table, watching how his son was no longer embarrassed about the mess. Instead, he was enjoying it. A group of customers at a nearby table called out for Claire, and she hurried over to take their order. Donovan finally had a moment alone with Ethan. He cleared his throat. "You like her," he said quietly, almost surprised at the sound of his own voice. Ethan looked up from his plate, spaghetti sauce on his cheek. He nodded without hesitation. "She's funny." Donovan didn't know how to respond. His son rarely spoke so directly, especially about how he felt. He wanted to ask more, to keep the conversation going, but the words stuck in his throat. When Claire returned a few minutes later, it was Ethan who spoke first, his voice louder than usual. "Can you draw a dragon fighting a superhero?" he asked, his shyness melting away in the warmth of her presence. Claire's eyes lit up as if he had just given her the most important task in the world. "Of course," she said, "but you'll have to help me. I'll draw the dragon, you draw the fire." She handed him a pen and a napkin, and together they leaned over the table, sketching silly shapes that looked nothing like a dragon but everything like joy. Donovan sat back in his chair, watching. His chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't tell if it was sadness or something else. Maybe it was regret, maybe longing. He had always provided for Ethan in the way he thought mattered most: money, security, opportunities. But here, with nothing more than a pen and a napkin, a stranger was giving his son something priceless: connection. As the evening went on, Ethan grew braver. He asked Claire about her favorite animals, her favorite colors, even what she'd like to eat. She answered every question with the same enthusiasm, turning each answer into a little story. "I like penguins," she said, "because they wear tuxedos all the time. They're always ready for a fancy party." Ethan laughed so loudly that Donovan actually glanced around, half expecting someone to shush them, but no one did. The restaurant was alive with noise, with families and laughter, and for once, Donovan didn't mind. When dessert time came, Claire brought a small bowl of ice cream for Ethan, complete with a cherry on top. "Superhero fuel," she said with a wink. Ethan's face lit up as he dug in, sticky hands and all. Donovan didn't even bother telling him to slow down or to wipe his face. He just watched. For the first time in years, he was seeing his son as more than a quiet shadow trailing behind him. He was seeing him as a child, happy, playful, full of life. Toward the end of the meal, when Ethan dropped his spoon and it clattered under the table, Donovan leaned forward to pick it up. But before he could move, Claire had already crouched down again. She peered under the table dramatically, her voice dropping into a whisper. "The spoon has joined the secret underground kingdom," she said. "We must rescue it before it's lost forever." Ethan, already giggling, slid off his chair without hesitation. He crawled under the table with her, both of them making silly adventure noises, as if they were explorers in a cave. Donovan froze, watching as his son disappeared beneath the tablecloth, laughter spilling out, and then something unexpected happened. Donovan didn't feel annoyed or embarrassed. He didn't feel like telling them to stop. Instead, he felt an ache in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He had never crawled on the floor with his son. He had never entered his world like this, and yet here was a young woman who wasn't even related to Ethan, making it look effortless. When they re-emerged with the spoon, Ethan's cheeks were flushed with joy, his eyes bright. He climbed back into his seat, clutching the spoon like a treasure. Claire gave him a triumphant high five. "Mission accomplished again," she said proudly. Donovan sat in silence, his food long forgotten. He studied his son's face, memorizing the way it glowed. It was as though a curtain had lifted, showing him a side of Ethan he had never truly seen. Something stirred deep inside him, something he couldn't yet name. But he knew one thing for certain: nothing about this dinner was ordinary anymore that night. As Claire cleared their table and wished them a good evening, Donovan felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Watching her walk away, he realized that his carefully built world, his routines, his business, his distance had just been shaken by something as simple as a waitress crawling on the floor to make a little boy laugh. And as Ethan clutched the doodled napkins like treasures, Donovan knew this was only the beginning of a change he couldn't stop. Donovan sat still, his fork untouched. As the scene in front of him unfolded like something from a world he didn't know existed, his son was on the floor laughing, crawling under the table with a waitress who had no reason to care this much. Claire's voice rose in playful tones, her hands sweeping across the floor as if she were searching through hidden tunnels. Ethan followed her every move, giggling so hard that he lost his balance and fell onto his side. Clutching his toy car like it was the treasure they had rescued together, for Donovan. The moment was strange, almost surreal. He was a man who lived in the clean lines of boardrooms, the silent comfort of luxury cars, and the rigid order of schedules. Nothing in his life looked like this. No one in his world would ever dream of crawling under a table in a restaurant, making silly noises to entertain a child. It was chaotic, messy, unprofessional. And yet, there was something in it, something alive, something he couldn't look away from. Ethan crawled back into his seat, his cheeks red with laughter. "We got it, Dad," he exclaimed, holding up the spoon as if it were a golden trophy. His voice was louder than usual, filled with pride. Donovan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. His son's face was glowing. That expression, bright, fearless joy, was one he couldn't remember the last time he had seen. Maybe when Ethan was a toddler, before his wife left, before life turned into endless work and schedules. Donovan felt a sharp ache in his chest. Like guilt mixed with wonder, Claire leaned against the table, brushing dust from her knees. "That was a close one," she whispered to Ethan, grinning. "For a moment, I thought the spoon was gone forever." Ethan nodded seriously, playing along. "But we saved it," he said, his voice full of determination. Donovan watched, silent. Something inside him shifted, though he couldn't name it yet. He realized, in that instant, that this waitress had done something he had never managed to do. She had made his son forget his shyness. She had reached into that quiet little shell and pulled out the laughter hidden inside. When the food was gone and the plates were cleared, Donovan found himself unable to take his eyes off Ethan. The boy was still holding the napkins with doodles, keeping them safe like prized possessions. Claire passed by other tables, checking on her customers, but Ethan's eyes followed her every time she walked across the room. Donovan noticed it and felt something stir inside him again, not jealousy, not annoyance, but a strange kind of awakening. His son wanted this. His son wanted connection, attention, someone who saw him. The father leaned back in his chair, his thoughts unsettled. He had given Ethan everything money could buy, the biggest toys, the best schools, a house so large that one could get lost in it. But none of that had made him smile the way Claire's silly doodles and crawling on the floor had. Donovan's mind raced. How could something so simple mean more than everything he had worked for? When Claire returned to drop off the check, she crouched again to Ethan's level. "You did great tonight," she said softly. "You were brave and funny. You're a natural hero." Ethan beamed, clutching his toy car to his chest. "Can I come back here?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Donovan froze, hearing the unspoken truth behind the question. His son wasn't asking for more food. He was asking to come back for her. Claire laughed softly. "Of course you can," she said. "But only if you promise to keep drawing dragons for me." Ethan nodded quickly, as if sealing the deal. Donovan reached into his wallet and placed a few crisp bills on the tray. It's far more than the meal required. But for once, money didn't feel like the real payment here. He looked at Claire and said something he rarely said to anyone, especially someone in service. "Thank you." His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its usual authority. Claire glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone, then gave a small nod. As they left the restaurant, Ethan skipped a little, his steps light. Donovan held his hand, but instead of leading, it felt like Ethan was the one pulling him forward. The night air was cool, and the city lights blinked around them, but Donovan's mind wasn't on his empire or his meetings. It was on the image of his son, under the table, laughing, alive, connected. The ride home was different from usual. Normally, Ethan would sit quietly in the back seat, staring out the window. This time, he chattered softly, replaying the adventures of the night. "She said spaghetti makes you a superhero," he murmured with a grin. "And we saved the spoon. And she draws dragons, too." He hugged the napkins in his small hands, refusing to let them crumple. Donovan listened, his eyes fixed on the road, but his heart tugged by every word. When they reached the mansion, the vast house loomed like a reminder of the life Donovan had built. The lights were on, the staff waiting. But inside, everything felt colder than it had before. Ethan ran up the steps, still holding the napkins, and Donovan followed slowly. For the first time, he felt the size of the house as something heavy, not impressive. All that space, all that wealth, and yet it had never given Ethan the warmth he had just received in a small, noisy restaurant. That night, Donovan sat in his study long after Ethan had gone to bed. His phone buzzed with messages, his laptop glowed with reports, but he ignored them. He sat in silence, thinking of Claire on the floor, pretending to rescue a spoon, and Ethan's laughter echoing in his ears. It replayed again and again, as if his mind refused to let him forget. It struck him suddenly. He had been absent. Not absent physically, but absent in the ways that mattered. He had been there in the room, yes, but not really present. He had been a provider, not a companion. He had been a guardian, not a playmate. His son hadn't needed more toys or more privileges. He had needed moments small, simple moments where someone truly saw him. Donovan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. The thought unsettled him deeply, because it meant he had been wrong. For years he had believed that giving Ethan everything would make up for his lack of time. But tonight had shattered that illusion. Claire had shown him something money couldn't buy: connection. As he sat there, he realized something else too. He didn't know how to do what Claire had done. He didn't know how to crawl on the floor and make silly noises. He didn't know how to draw doodles or turn spilled sauce into a joke. The thought frightened him. How could he bridge the gap between himself and his son when he didn't even know where to begin? But then he thought of Ethan's face. Bright, alive, hopeful. He thought of the way his son had looked at him tonight, as if waiting for his father to join in, to notice, to be part of the adventure. That memory burned in his mind, stronger than the fear. Maybe he didn't know how to start. But maybe it wasn't too late to try. Upstairs in his room, Ethan fell asleep with the napkins still on his bedside table. His small hand rested near them as if he were afraid they would disappear during the night. He dreamed of dragons and superheroes, while his father sat awake downstairs, staring into the quiet and realizing his life was about to change, because sometimes it takes a stranger crawling on the floor to show a billionaire father that the richest treasure he could ever have was sitting right in front of him all along. In the days that followed, Donovan found himself unable to stop thinking about that dinner. He had attended thousands of meals in his lifetime, some with world leaders, some with billionaires, some in the most expensive restaurants in the world. But none of those evenings stayed in his mind the way one simple dinner at a family restaurant had. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the place. It was the sight of his son laughing under a table with a waitress. That picture replayed in his mind every time he tried to focus on his work. He sat in his office tower overlooking the city. The kind of view most people only dream about. But instead of feeling powerful, he felt distracted. The numbers on the page blurred, the voices of his advisors faded, and in his head he heard Ethan's giggles. That sound had broken through the noise of his life, and it refused to leave. For the first time in years, Donovan realized how empty his world had been. At home, Ethan seemed lighter too. The boy who usually ate his meals quietly and disappeared to his room now hummed softly while building with his blocks. He still didn't talk much, but there was a glow in his eyes, as though something inside him had been awakened. Donovan noticed it when he walked past his son's door late at night and saw the napkins with doodles still carefully placed on the bedside table. They had become treasures, reminders of a night where he had been seen, heard, and valued. Donovan sat on his bed one evening, loosening his tie, staring at those napkins when he passed Ethan's room. He thought about how easily Claire had connected with his boy. She hadn't used wealth, status, or grand gestures. She had simply bent down to his level and listened. That was all. Donovan felt a heaviness in his chest, a guilt he wasn't used to. He had given Ethan everything except himself. The next weekend, Donovan tried something different. Instead of going to the office early, he stayed home. He knocked on Ethan's door and asked, "Want to play something?" Ethan looked at him strangely, as if he wasn't sure if his father was serious. But when Donovan sat on the carpet beside him, Ethan slowly pushed over a few toy cars. Donovan picked one up awkwardly, not knowing what to do. He felt foolish at first, but Ethan's face softened when he saw his father trying. They rolled the cars across the carpet, and Donovan even made a sound effect that made Ethan laugh. It was clumsy, uncomfortable, but it was real. Donovan began to notice things he had ignored before: the way Ethan's eyes lit up when someone listened, the way he laughed at silly noises, the way he wanted to share even the smallest things if someone cared enough to look. It was like discovering a map he had never read, one that led directly to his son's heart. After a few days, Donovan couldn't resist going back to the restaurant. He told himself it was just for the food, but deep down he knew better. He wanted to see Claire again, to watch her in action, to understand how she did it. He walked in with Ethan, and the boy's eyes widened with excitement the moment he recognized her. Claire spotted them quickly and waved, her face lighting up. "Well, if it isn't my superhero team," she said cheerfully as she came over. Ethan's grin spread across his whole face, and he leaned forward eagerly. Donovan felt a strange warmth in his chest at the sight. As they ate, Donovan watched Claire more carefully this time. He noticed how she crouched to talk to children, how she teased teenagers just enough to make them laugh, how she remembered little details about the families who came often. She wasn't just serving food, she was building connections. She made every person feel like they mattered. Donovan, who had spent his life commanding respect and authority, realized she was doing something far more powerful. She was giving people kindness. When Ethan went to the restroom, Donovan finally spoke to her. "You're very good with children," he said, his tone more curious than casual. Claire shrugged modestly. "I just like making them smile. Sometimes kids get overlooked, you know. Grown-ups are always busy, but kids, they notice when you pay attention." Her words struck Donovan harder than he expected. Busy. That was his entire excuse. Busy with work, busy with meetings, busy with building a fortune. All the while, Ethan had been overlooked. Claire glanced toward Ethan's empty chair, and then back at Donovan. "Your son is wonderful. He just needs someone to see him. That's all." Donovan swallowed, feeling something tighten in his throat. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," she said with a soft smile. "Kids don't care about big things. They care about moments. You'd be surprised how much of a difference 5 minutes on the floor can make." Ethan returned, sliding back into his seat, and the conversation ended. But Donovan's mind kept replaying those words. Moments. Not money, not toys, not schools. Just moments. Over the next few weeks, Donovan tried to change. At first, it was small. He left work a little earlier. He sat with Ethan while he did homework. He learned to ask questions, not just about grades, but about what Ethan liked, what he thought, what he dreamed. The boy, hesitant at first, began to open up. His laughter became more common in the house, echoing down the long, empty halls. The mansion didn't feel as silent anymore. One evening, Donovan found himself on the floor, drawing with Ethan. His lines were crooked. His dragons looked ridiculous, but Ethan didn't care. He laughed and added fire breath to his father's creature. And for the first time, Donovan felt like he wasn't just watching his son's world, he was part of it. But he didn't forget Claire. He visited the restaurant a few more times, sometimes with Ethan, sometimes alone. He would sit and observe, learning from her without saying much. Eventually, one evening when the place was less busy, he asked, "How did you learn to connect like that?" Claire paused, then gave a small sigh. "I grew up in a house where no one really listened. My parents worked a lot, and I was just there. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd make sure kids felt like they mattered, even if it's just for a few minutes in a restaurant." Her honesty hit him harder than he expected. It was like hearing his son's unspoken story told through someone else's mouth. Donovan realized that Ethan had been living the same quiet loneliness Claire once had as the evening wound down. Donovan sat in his car with Ethan sleeping in the back seat. He looked at his son's peaceful face and then at the doodled napkins still clutched in his small hands. The boy hadn't let them go in weeks. In that moment, Donovan knew his life had changed. He had spent years chasing wealth, power, success. But none of that compared to the treasure sitting in the back seat. He understood now what Claire had shown him. The real investment wasn't in buildings or stocks. It was in time, in laughter, in presence, and for the first time in his life, Donovan was determined to give his son exactly that. Donovan woke up early that morning with a strange feeling he hadn't experienced in years. There was no urgency, no pressure, no endless list of meetings demanding his attention. Instead, there was a quiet excitement, an anticipation for a day he could spend with his son. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the weight of wealth or responsibility pressing down on him. Today, he realized, was about something far more important. He went into Ethan's room and found the boy still asleep. The napkins with doodles neatly stacked on his bedside table. Donovan smiled quietly. He had watched his son change over the past few weeks. The quiet, reserved child had become lively, playful, and confident. The laughter that had once been so rare was now common in their house. Donovan felt proud but also humbled. He had been given the chance to see Ethan truly, to be a part of his happiness, and he intended not to waste it. After breakfast, Donovan suggested they spend the morning outside. Ethan's eyes lit up immediately. He grabbed his toy car and ran toward the front door, nearly tripping in his excitement. Donovan laughed, a sound that had not been heard in the mansion for years. Together, they walked to a nearby park, talking about everything and nothing. Donovan found himself asking questions he had never thought to ask before about Ethan's friends. His favorite games? What made him happy? Ethan answered eagerly, and Donovan listened, really listened. For the first time, the simplicity of it amazed him. A father and son, talking and playing in the sunlight. No schedules, no phones, no meetings. Donovan realized how much he had missed, how much life had passed without these small but crucial moments. He felt a deep gratitude toward Claire, the waitress who had unknowingly started this change. Without her, he might never have understood what his son truly needed. Later, Donovan decided to visit the restaurant again, this time without the excuse of a meal. He wanted to thank Claire properly. When he walked in, she was busy attending tables, laughing, moving with energy that seemed endless. She noticed him immediately and waved. Donovan approached cautiously. I wanted to thank you," he said. "You've shown me something important." "Something I had forgotten." Claire paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm glad to hear that," she said softly. "But really all I did was give Ethan a few minutes of attention. He's the one who made it special." "He's a bright boy," Donovan shook his head. "You made it special. You showed me what I was missing. You taught me how to see my son." He hesitated for a moment, unsure how much of himself he should reveal. "I've spent years chasing success, money, everything. But none of it matters if I can't be here for him." Claire's eyes softened. "It's never too late to start," she said. "You're here now. That's what matters." Donovan left the restaurant that day feeling a lightness he hadn't known in years. He understood something crucial. Wealth could buy comfort, security, status, but it could not buy love, presence, or connection. Those were things that had to be given freely from one heart to another. At home, he began to live that lesson. He started scheduling moments with Ethan that weren't planned around meetings or obligations. They played board games, drew pictures, built toy forts, and even made up stories together. Donovan's presence became consistent, predictable, and genuine. He discovered that his son's happiness was contagious. The more time he spent with Ethan, the more laughter filled the mansion, and the more Donovan felt alive. Ethan, too, grew in ways Donovan hadn't imagined. The boy who had once been shy and reserved now spoke openly about his thoughts and dreams. He laughed freely, played without fear, and shared his ideas without hesitation. Donovan noticed that the joy in his home extended beyond Ethan. It touched him too. He realized that by giving attention, patience, and love, he was receiving something equally precious in return: the feeling of being connected, of truly belonging. Weeks turned into months, and Donovan continued to prioritize time with his son. He also maintained contact with Claire, not in a romantic sense, but as someone he respected and learned from. Sometimes, he would watch her interact with other families at the restaurant. Observing the effortless kindness she extended to everyone around her, he saw in her a rare gift: the ability to make people feel important, seen, and valued. Donovan knew he wanted to carry that lesson forward in his own life, with his son and with anyone else who crossed his path. One weekend, Donovan and Ethan returned to the restaurant together. This time, Donovan crouched down beside his son and joined in the playful antics. They laughed, drew pictures, and even crawled under the table for fun, just as Claire had done weeks before. Ethan looked up at his father, eyes wide with delight, and Donovan felt a surge of love and pride unlike anything money could ever provide. That night, as Donovan tucked Ethan into bed, he noticed the little napkins still stacked neatly beside him. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Ethan's forehead. "And I'm going to keep trying to be the father you deserve." Ethan hugged him tightly, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than words could express. Donovan felt a sense of completion, not in wealth, not in status, but in the bond he had built with his son. Over time, Donovan's outlook on life shifted completely. He began to see that the moments he spent with Ethan were more valuable than any business deal. He learned to slow down, to appreciate the small joys, to laugh at the little absurdities of life. The mansion no longer felt empty because it was now filled with laughter, stories, and love. Donovan, once a man defined by power and money, was now defined by something far richer: the relationship with his son and the lessons he had learned about what truly mattered in life. The billionaire who had once measured success by wealth now measured it in moments. A laugh shared, a story told, a game played on the floor, and he realized that those were the moments that would last far longer than any fortune he could leave behind. Donovan had changed not because he had to, but because he saw the happiness he could create in his son's life. One quiet evening, as he watched Ethan fall asleep, Donovan thought back to that first night at the restaurant. He remembered Claire crawling under the table, making a simple act of playfulness seem extraordinary. That night had changed everything. It had awakened something in him that he didn't know existed: the capacity to be present, to connect, and to love without conditions. Donovan smiled to himself. He knew life would still bring challenges, still bring obligations and responsibilities, but he also knew that as long as he stayed present for Ethan, As long as he continued to cherish the moments they shared, nothing else would matter as much. He had learned the true meaning of wealth, not the fortune he held, but the love he shared and the connection he nurtured. And from that day forward, Donovan and Ethan continued to grow together, their bond stronger than ever. The laughter, the drawings, the adventures, they became the rhythm of their life. Donovan never forgot the lesson he had learned from a simple, extraordinary waitress. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness and attention can change everything. And in the heart of a little boy, and in the heart of a father, the world could feel endlessly full.